Hello and well, thank you for joining me for another 5 minute video. And I was thinking just a little bit, and since the last video I posted on the coronavirus, and with people being quarantined and everything, people not being able to gather at church buildings to meet for worship, it just made me think a little bit. So I thought maybe this time I should speak about worship. You remember I said that I wanted to do a couple of topics, so I just thought this one should go to the top of the list. Now, there is a proper way to worship, and that is spoken of in John 4:24, in spirit and in truth. Now, if you are worshiping God in spirit and in truth, and maybe before I go into that, there are other ways of worship which we see a lot more today amongst a lot of other people. That will be will worship, that is worshiping according to the will of man and not according to that of God. Colossians 2:27, and then in Mark 7:7 it describes it as vain worship. So any other worship that is not according to John 4:24 will become vain worship. Now, if you are to worship in truth and in spirit, if you have been worshiping God in that same way, then even on a day when you're not able to go to the church building, you should still be able to do that from your home. uh, just because now we are worshiping from screen, and maybe even for you, this applies to those who are quarantined and those who are not. Maybe you have not been thinking that much about worship, so I just want us to consider it a lot more, to worship in truth and in spirit. And those, maybe just to define those really quickly, in truth, that is the proper way according to what God has commanded of us, which is, of course, according to the Bible. A good reason to keep reading it. And in spirit, in the correct manner. You approach God in the correct manner. How do you come before God? How do you present yourself before God? So, in thinking about these things, whenever we present worship to God, who is the audience of our worship? Is it God or is it other men? And I ask this question, maybe what are some of the things you do in worship? What are some of the habits maybe you have when you're in worship? Is it something you would do if you could see, let's say Jesus just descended right then and there and sat in on one of the seats in front of you? Is it something you would do when he could see that he is present? Uh, if our worship is aimed at God, then anytime we're coming to worship, we should always think and know and understand God can see what you're doing and He knows what you're doing, so it should always be with the proper manner and the proper way. So even while we're at home, we should treat it the same way. But I want to encourage everybody, uh, whether you are quarantined or not, to think more on this. What are some of the ways maybe to show reverence to God? And a good example that has been used often, I've heard it from some preachers, when you go to worship, in the building where you worship, if there is a chair that is usually set in front, it's usually for people to do, who are going to stand up there and do something. Or maybe just if you do not happen to have chairs at the front of the room, maybe one of the empty chairs in front of you. Just to imagine that Jesus is sitting in there, in that chair. Of course, we do not know what Jesus looks like, but if he was there in person, how would you behave yourself in that time of worship? Um, Another example that has been used is if the president were to visit your house, or if you were to visit the president's house. I think that's a much better example. How would you behave yourself? Are there things that you would do in front of somebody who you consider greater than you? Are there things that you would not do? Are those some of the kinds of things you do in worship? Are they the kinds of things we should not be doing in worship? Because we got to think and remember that God is much greater than anybody. So I thought the corona might have been actually it's one of the things that's actually good to get us to reflect on some of the things we do. So there's a lot of good that can come out of a bad situation if we always think spiritually and try to improve ourselves. This will be the 5 minute. Thank you.